Just gotta love when Bible believers demonstrate the contradictions by which you will find in the Bible itself. So in a previous video, I talked about the fact that if you are a real Christian, you should be following the law. All the rites, all the rituals, all the laws, all the commandments, you should still be following. Actually multiple Christians decided to come on that video and express how Jesus' sacrifice ended man's time frame of being under the law. And this is a snapshot of what they sent me. Now, if you notice, when you look at Matthew 5:17 through 18, they obviously have some levels of reading comprehension and don't recognize the contradictions that are written by Paul or claim to be have written by Paul. So in 17 and 18, it clearly says, and let's go through this together. I say, do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. So the law is not to be abolished, nor the prophets are abolished. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. Fulfill the prophecy of the Messiah, fulfill the prophecy of a new age, a new time frame where man will be able to join with God and live in holiness with this God, where Israel would be the dominant country on the planet, where God's law will pervade through everything. The will of God will be with all men. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth passes away. That is very important right there. Until heaven and earth passes away. Not in first century CE, but when heaven and earth passes away. This will be all the apocalyptic writings in Daniel, all the apocalyptic writings in Ezekiel, the apocalyptic writings in Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John, the apocalyptic writings of Revelations. So until this Jesus returns, because that is when heaven and earth will pass away, and it'll be a new heaven and a new earth. Not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all this is accomplished. So not until all the things of Revelations and the apocalypse and the other writings have passed, have happened, have went by, will you not keep the law. All the law is supposed to be there. So the hypocrisy comes when Paul begins to write in Romans, in Galatians, and he writes things like in Romans 7:8. But now we have been released from the law, having died to that by which we were bonded, so that we serve in newness of the Spirit and not in oldness of the letter. I don't have my glasses, that's why it's hard for me to read it. But I want you to think about that. Is Paul saying something contradictory to your Jesus character, whether it's 7 verse 6 or 7 verse 4? Paul is saying that you do not have to live based on the law anymore. Now, why is Paul saying this? And Paul is saying this decades after the Jesus character supposedly was crucified. Decades have gone by. Christianity has went through at minimum 30 years, of oral tradition, 30 years of people telling stories about Jesus. And we know what happens when people tell stories for over 30 years. The stories change, the ideas change, the teachings change, what happened changed. People are trying to recollect things that they may not recollect in the way that it actually happened. This is why there are discrepancies throughout your gospels. But here we have Paul, who's never met the Jesus character, claims that he met some of the apostles, is telling you things based on what other people have said. But in this, Paul is in direct confrontation with what Matthew, whoever is the author of Matthew, wrote. Not until heaven and earth pass away, not one dot, not one tittle shall be taken away from the law, until all these things are accomplished. Yet Paul is saying otherwise. Now, why would Paul be saying otherwise? Not only because of 30 years plus have went by, but also and mainly the audience by which Paul is speaking to. You see, if Paul was speaking to a Jewish crowd, as Matthew was, Matthew, speaking to a Jewish crowd, is going to say that the Jewish Messiah is going to maintain the laws of Moses, is going to maintain the prophets, the prophecies, and the prophets and the judges, that he's going to maintain that portion of Judaism that says, as the Bible quotes many times in Leviticus and many times in Deuteronomy and many times in Numbers, that all these laws, statutes, and commandments are to be perpetual for all time. So with Matthew writing to a Jewish audience, the Messiah must look and act as a Jewish Messiah would act in maintaining the laws established by Moses, the laws in Leviticus and Deuteronomy and Numbers. But Paul is writing to the Gentiles. He's writing to the Roman audience. He's writing to an audience in Anatolia, in Roman Anatolia. He's writing to audiences who are Greek, who are Roman. So therefore, when Paul writes, these people are not looking to become Jewish. The Jewish people were not looked upon favorably in first century CE. They weren't favorable in second century CE. As a matter of fact, they were still rioting and going against the emperor during those time frames. So in Paul's efforts to convert Gentiles, he wrote that you are not held to the laws of the Jewish people, because what Roman, what Greek would follow this little insignificant to them Jewish tribe, Judea? Judea was considered just a connection point for trade. It was not some big center of growth, of civilization, of intellect, or anything of that. Rome didn't look at Judea as such. It was great for moving military troops. It was great for communicating in that region for the Roman Empire. But as far as being a place of political power, it was not. It was a stepping stone for Roman governors, and simply just that. So when Paul was writing, he's writing to the Greeks. So the story must be favorable to the Greeks. In order to get them to be able to convert, he had to take away the Jewishness of Jesus. And that is why Paul writes the contradiction to what Matthew wrote. So the question is, are you a Paulinian Christian, or are you according to Matthew, a Jesus Jewish Christian? That's the question. Now, of course, I know that for the majority of people, they've grown up in cultures that are different than the Jewish culture. You're not going to want to bend knee to a culture that is not indigenous to your own. So you're going to follow the Paulinian mindset, which is why Christians came out to say what they had to say concerning the video of "Are You a Real Christian?" But at the end of the day, we know that there is no such thing as a real Christian, because we know that there is no such thing as that. We know that as the biblical Jesus. We also know that the stories of Judaism are just concocted stories, that none of them are actually true and historical. So therefore, it is all just something of belief and nothing of fact. And yes, if you decide that you want to stake your life on this belief in the same way that someone does over the Quran or the Vedics or any other religion, you are more than within your rights to do so. I find it interesting, though, of how many people curtail their religion to their modern day culture of today, which demonstrates that you really don't have faith in it yourself. So why are you even bothering? Just be a good person and treat everyone with respect, love, and consideration. So y'all have a great day. And always remember, you have to free yourself to be yourself, because your greatness is non-negotiable. Good journey, good vibrations.